Russian military jets buzzing a U.S. Navy ship last week delivered a pretty clear message. Russia intends to challenge the U.S. wherever and whenever it sees fit. The rise of Russia, combined with the threat of ISIS, shines an especially bright light on the foreign policy proposals of each presidential candidate. This hour, we tackle the Republicans. Next hour, we break down where Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders stand on foreign policy. Fox News national security analyst KT McFarland joins us now to discuss. KT, good to see you.
Great to see you.
We know you worked for President Reagan, and as we look at this big picture, what's more important, a man's temperament and his view of the world, or actually his policy experience and how he views every minute issue as we go to the ballot box?
You know, Leland, that's a really good question that often gets overlooked. I mean, I've worked not only for Reagan, but for Nixon in the beginnings of their administrations where they were trying to translate campaign promises into reality, and often reality gets in the way. You can't deliver exactly what you thought you'd be able to do. So I don't look anymore for those tiny little details. I mean, they're interesting, they give you an indication, but I'm looking for the big, broad brush strokes of a candidate's position. And I look at the three Republicans, Trump, Cruz, Kasich, I don't see a whole lot of difference. Now, I'm sure that Cruz and Kasich would say, oh yeah, there's a huge difference, it's this, it's that. But in reality, they're all going for the same thing. You know, get control of immigration, build a border, fight ISIS, use economic means to fight ISIS, build up America's defenses so we don't get picked on by anybody, and have an eye on China for the long game.
All right, so we'll look in terms of temperament that you say is so important. Here's where the voters come down on it. Has the temperament to serve effectively as president? The latest Fox News poll, Cruz, yes, 61, no, 35, Trump, yes, 33. 65% of those polled, those say Donald Trump does not have the temperament to serve effectively as president. So now we'll go through at least a couple of their individual proposals. You tell me whether they're practical or not. Ted Cruz says he wants to carpet bomb ISIS and be tougher on Vladimir Putin.
Makes sense, yeah.
Makes sense.
I carpet bomb, but it's not enough to just say you're going to have a bombing raid on ISIS. It's got to be a much bigger proposal, because radical Islam, you can't just bomb it out of existence. You have to use economic means. You have to use ideological means, political means, diplomatic means, covert intelligence, covert operations, and an alliance structure. So merely saying I'm going to carpet bomb them, great soundbite, but it's not a big enough policy.
You talked in terms of the policy, in terms of taking on radical Islam, of economic development, Arab partners, those kinds of things. That's something John Kasich has talked a lot about, a much more nuanced approach than what we've either heard from Cruz or for Trump. How do you view that?
You know, here's my problem with Kasich's approach. He says, well, I'm going to have an alliance. I'm not going to put U.S. troops on the ground, but I'm going to have an alliance of moderate Muslim states. They're going to put their troops on the ground. Well, guess what? They haven't done it. And when Kasich is asked the follow-up, well, how is your plan going to be different than everything that's happened in the last 15 years? He doesn't really have an answer. He just says, well, it will be different. So I think that's kind of unrealistic.
Last, as we get to Donald Trump in our final moment or so, he sometimes is tough to nail down on exactly what his foreign policy comes to when you look at ISIS. Sometimes it's more isolationist, sometimes it's more interventionist, those kinds of things. But specifically about Russia, you've had a lot of experience with the Russians. We just saw them buzz a U.S. Navy ship in the past week or so. And if you listen to Donald Trump, his foreign policy as it goes to Russia seems to be like, gee, I'm going to get along with Putin and things are going to be better. Does that seem like it'd work to you?
Well, look, I look at all the countries we have as enemies right now, Iran, ISIS, China, Russia. I think there's a lot of enemies. I'm looking, is there any way that we could maybe work with the Russians to defeat radical Islam? The other thing I'm looking at, though, with regard to Russia and any of these countries and any of these crises we have, I think that we're headed for an economic crisis, another global crisis on the level of, say, 2008. Which of these candidates is best equipped to understand financial markets, world trade, and make sure that the United States comes out on top? I think I'm looking at a businessman as opposed to a politician, and I'm thinking that may be the person you want there in the Oval Office if there's an economic crisis.
Did I just hear an endorsement, KT?
No, I'm not endorsing anybody, but I'm saying that there are some strengths that maybe Trump brings to it that others don't. On the other hand, I look at Cruz, and he's had a lot of experience. He's studied the issues in detail. The one I think is probably the weakest foreign policy would be Kasich.
Yeah, and he would take issue with that, saying he served on the Armed Services Committee for more than a decade
and
as well.
I've known him. I knew him when he did.
Well,
But I think that the nuanced approach sometimes is a little too soft. What you need are broad brushstrokes.
All right, as broad brushstrokes indeed. KT McFarland, appreciate your time. Thank you, ma'am.